Good evening. Welcome to the Cambridge Union. Today we will be welcoming Shygirl. She's a British rapper, DJ, singer, songwriter, and co-founder of record label and collective Nuxie. Her latest EP, Alias, has received critical acclaim for drawing upon multiple different styles and has been described as a glittering portal into the future by Pitchfork. I'm so happy to be sitting across from Shy today. So tell me what you're up to.
Always good to check. At the moment, apart from being with you guys today, I've been working on my next album and also just working on visuals as much as possible in this time, which is hard because we don't have shows at the moment and we don't know when they're coming back. We kind of have a soft date, but like who knows, with this last year, like we all know we kind of have to prepare for the spontaneous, but yeah, visuals.
Any hints that you can tell us about cool visuals that will be coming up?
I like to keep it as a surprise because that's like the top element really that I have to hold.
Of course. On the visual element, you've spoken a lot about how directing your own videos and really taking creative control out of the process has been your biggest career highlight. What would you say is really, really special about that?
I think just getting to kind of portray my own narrative, because I think so often like we don't get the chance to tell our own stories, and also someone else wants to speak for us all the time. And speaking from the perspective of like a young black woman also residing within the queer community, the stories are interesting and people know that, but they want to tell them for us. So it's really nice to be able to like utilize the platform I have for myself and for others like me.
Yeah, what does that mean to you, like telling your own story versus like having it told about you?
I guess I have an ego about it. I think I'm the only one that can tell it as best as possible because I've experienced it. Anyone else that does that is only going to tell half the story. So yeah, I'm obviously always going to tussle over saying things for myself.
Yeah, for sure. And then in directing videos, how do you feel you can manage telling your story versus the music that you create? So how do you separate yourself and your music when you're directing videos? You're behind the camera and you're also in the shot.
I don't think there's much of a separation. I think you kind of live in the world that you're trying to create. Like for me, I'm thinking of the lyrics and the music, and they don't come to life unless I continue building the world around it. How else can I expect people to really absorb what I'm saying if I don't give context to that? And I think there's no real separation between myself as an artist and myself as a director because I'm constantly in the driving seat in both positions.
Yeah, that's amazing. Speaking about being in the driving seat, you've spoken a lot in other interviews about how you use a lot of alter egos, especially on your latest EP. I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about each of those alter egos, what they mean to you and what they mean for your music.
I think they're less alter egos, more like a dissection of self. I think in all circumstances we probably amplify, aspects of our character. You sit with one group of friends and you're more like vivacious, and another group you're probably more quiet because like there's other louder characters in you, or like different settings require different things from you. And I think when I was looking back at the music I had made, I was thinking, how do I kind of explain who I was in the moments that I wrote each song? In one room I'm probably more vulnerable, and in another room with a different producer I was like feeling myself. I was thinking like, what, I want to be like the loudest character in the room. And I saw that as like different characters almost, but they all build up me as a full person. Sorry. It's hard to really like describe yourself all in one go. I wanted to have like dissectable pieces. It's something that I wanted people to absorb and take time over. I think if there's anything worth saying, you should take the time to say it.
For sure. And about the dissection of the self, do you feel like there were specific aspects that came out in some alter egos, or something that you wanted people to take away from the EP that came from all of those different portions of yourself?
I think, I have a unique position in being able to like revel in every aspect of myself on like a large platform. Like it's not often that you get the chance to talk about yourself and to talk about it to so many people all the time. I think when you have that opportunity, you should run with it. Like how often am I able to be completely selfish or self-absorbed? Life is hard and you can't do that every time. So I really wanted to take that opportunity in my music and in what I'm saying and what I'm talking about. I think especially when I'm talking about like sex and love and relationships, it's all one-sided. It's all from my perspective. I think that's like a really hard thing to be able to like, I don't know, you can't do that when you're in the relationship. I didn't get that conversation when I was with my partner or partners, like I wanted to be able to do that on a 2-minute track, on a 3-minute video.
For sure. And sort of showing your side of the story. Do you feel like when you make music, do you go through that creative process of trying to represent yourself? Or talk me through the process of how you make music.
I think it's different because I never do it alone. Like I sit in a room with another producer or another musician, and that in itself is like a speed dating type environment. You get to, see yourself differently every time you're in the room with someone else. You're like, how does this person see me? What do I want to show that person? And I think that's why it's really important, like the collaborations that I do, that we have some kind of relationship in that, like a friendship almost, to have that safe space.
On collaborations, what would you say has probably been your favorite collaboration and why?
God, that's a tough one. I think everything is different for like different reasons, I have some favorites that were because they pushed me, because I felt uncomfortable sometimes. But actually the song we made out of it was like something I would never have made in the room with someone I was too comfortable with. I'd say like my 2 highlights were Arca and Sophie, because I think they're the most like prolific producers of our generation right now, and I was lucky enough to get to work with them both.
For sure. I want to ask a little bit more about your process. You've spoken in other interviews about how you really had a radical shift between Cruel Practice and Alias, and the process of writing the album and how you've grown as an artist. And you've also spoken about the process you got in your first album, Cruel Practice, being sublime. Do you think you can sort of get back to that process of making music? Do you want to? And what do you think you're going to do next?
I guess hearing that I said that it was sublime is kind of funny, because it's like to say that about your own work is kind of outrageous. But I think you should feel like that after after every project. Like, how can I expect other people to like it and absorb me in some way without me being proud of what I've done? And for me, the pride comes from, being challenged and like coming out of it and learning something about myself. And I can't see that ever stopping in any of the music that I make. I hope not, anyway, otherwise I'll be doing something wrong.
That's really interesting, saying that you've learned so much about yourself in your music. What do you think or examples of some of those things?
I think, music for me is like therapy. So to some degree, it's things you probably already know but you're not conscious of. So like looking at things you do in the everyday or like repeated patterns. If I realize there's like lyrical content that I'm constantly going back to, I'm like, what was it about that situation that I need to still rehash in a different way? And like, why do I still feel so entertained by that story? I think it really made me look at the like personal relationships I had, both like familial and friends, because it's like, how much of myself am I giving away in those circumstances that I'm still like reliving and trying to make sense of in the music? But I'm probably a masochist, I keep going back.
And sort of on the flip side of that, like when you're making music, do you expect your listeners to sort of go through and have a similar thought process to you when you said music is therapy? What do you think your listeners can and do and should either take from your music or experience when they listen to it?
I don't know, with music I feel like it's like giving something up for adoption. You're intrigued by like what happens afterwards, but it's nothing really to do with you anymore. You know, like I do love hearing how people relate to the music, or you know, if they've even felt anything or know of it. But it's just like a mild curiosity. I don't really feel like I have any control or say over how someone responds to what I've made as soon as I put it out.
Who are your main musical influences?
Oh God, I'm always really cheesy when I think of that stuff, because it's like, for me, it's very nostalgic. It's like Madonna, Aphex Twin, Moloko, Bjork. I think most of those things are like what my parents put me onto. There's something like, it's so tied in with memory for me. Like, it's a gift, you know, to have someone else impart their own musical taste onto you, and without any kind of like knowledge of how that's going to affect you. And it's just like, you run away with it. And I think that's why I always go back to those kind of older, more informative musicians.
Do you feel like your parents got you into music and got you?
Yeah, without even trying, because they were just enjoying it themselves, you know. And it was almost like my dad used to leave me like a random CD he used to work in nightclubs, and he'd like come back and leave me a mixtape or whatever, just without a care. And I'd be listening to like old garage and stuff like that, and like having no context of the nightclub myself, because I was like 12. So like you've got like your idea of this environment that it lives within, and it's totally made up, you know, it's imaginary, but that's informed by the music I was listening to. And I think that's kind of what I want out of the music I'm making. It's not to fit in a space that's already made. It's just like create new spaces in your head and make them real.
That's really cool. What sort of spaces?
It's up to anyone. Like that was the beauty of it. It's not prescribed, you know. It's informed by the sound you're listening to and the people you end up meeting through it. You know, I've met so many people making music, even just like fans or other musicians, promoters, but everyone comes together on this one like familiar tie.
Talk to us about some of the people that...
Some of the people that are my favourites are almost nameless, because it's like momentary. It's like people that totally live in a memory of like when I played at a show in Bordeaux or whatever, and like there's been like a really genuine connection, and there's something so like mystical about it being for one night, and you don't remember each other's names because we're all drunk or whatever, like, but then you just have that memory together. And maybe I'll meet someone, or they'll message me again in like 10 years, like, oh, I remember when I first saw you in this like dusty club, and that's it. That's all we have together. I think that's really special.
Wow, that's really making, I think, us as students nostalgic for all of those nightclub experiences. I wanted to ask about this quote that you've given from an interview with Harper's Bazaar. You've indicated you wanted to present yourself differently and, quote, getting rid of expectations. I would say, what did you learn from that process, and sort of what did it show you?
I mean, it's easy enough for me to say it in hindsight in an interview, you know, like, probably not something I think about consciously whilst I'm doing it. Because this is why interviews are really interesting, because it does dredge up a lot of things that you're doing subconsciously, or make you think about where that comes from. Like, why do I have this desire to introduce myself so thoroughly, you know, in my music, or like make sure I'm not misinterpreted? And it's because I probably always felt like there was like an idea of me just from perhaps my economic background, the colour of my skin, my gender, you know, those are all things that probably do inform the way I tell the stories I do now. Because I feel like my voice wasn't heard properly at the time, or whatever I was saying was coloured by people's like misconceptions of what I stand for, you know?
Yeah, I actually wanted to talk about that. You've been a really fierce advocate to combat the misogyny and racism in the larger cultural media industry, so film, media, music. And you've recently spoken about an absolutely disgusting incident you had in a music video on set. Why do you think that these sorts of issues aren't being addressed at the moment?
Because the system supports it. Like, it's very, very hard to stand up for something when you know that your voice is going to get lost in the ether. And it's a shame that the people that do have to sacrifice so much to do so, you know. No one really wants to be an activist. We would much rather have things be like sorted out. You know, I'd much rather be able to go to work and shoot the things I want to shoot without having to consider before I even get on set that there's going to be misogyny. There's going to be potentially, like, you know, on this particular occasion, there was racism, you know, and like outwardly, it wasn't even like, you know, what's the word? Microaggressions, which I also find so ridiculous because they don't feel micro when they're happening. But yeah, it's just, I can't go to work thinking that something like that can happen and nothing will be done about it. I have to say something, because how else will I be able to do that job?
For sure. And do you feel like when you do say something, does that affect like your music? Do you feel like you're inspiring other people to say something? And do you think there can be change without people like yourself pushing for it?
In my mind, you know, like, I can't be mad at others if I'm not practicing what I preach. I want people to know that, you know, whoever comes to work with me knows what I'm about long before they come through the door. It would be a lot easier for me, you know? You kind of weed out the racists and the misogynists before they even get there.
I wish.
In theory. But I'm just trying to change the spaces that I'm in first, and hopefully that has a domino effect for other spaces. You know, I'm hopeful, I'm an optimist, but also a realist. You know, it takes time.
Yeah, and then working in an industry wildly dominated by men, how would you say that you found your place? Has it become easier with time?
I mean, I do like to be the one doing something different. So if there's a load of men in the room, I'm obviously, like, in my mind, at an advantage because I'm a woman. But I don't know. Mostly, gender isn't something that I think about on a daily basis until someone does something that reminds me of it. The same way, like, I'm happy just considering myself an individual as much as possible until someone does something that reminds you that you're a woman, or reminds you that you're black. That reminds you know what I mean? It's like only in those negative times that you realize that you stand for something bigger sometimes. And, you know, I was very naive about the work I was making at first, that it didn't mean anything other than what I wanted to say. When people started coming up to me and saying how important it was to see me on stage, or someone like me, I didn't realize I was someone like me. So it's interesting. It's still something that I'm learning to, like, be aware of and see how that does affect the work I'm making.
Do you feel like it might be holding you back, or feel like your career might be different if you didn't also have to be somebody like yourself, if you could just be yourself as an individual?
No, because at the same time, like, I have a lot of privilege. You know, I'm a light-skinned black woman. Like, that in itself, there's, like, so much colorism in the industry. Like, I know that I'm more palatable in some spaces than other people, and that's, like, a problem, but also, like, a privilege I have to be aware of. Because how else can I make space for other people if I'm not aware of my privileges?
How do you think the music industry can go further in combating those sorts of privileges?
Just listening to people. So many people have a ready response without even listening. I think people are very defensive of buzzwords and, like, this idea that being woke is a negative. Like, even in this incidence of racism on set, saying someone's a racist stops the conversation, because people have such an idea of what racism is without actually listening to what happened and why that was racist.
For sure. I sort of want to switch tacks about your personal life and your career. So you've made the Forbes 30 Under 30. What did that mean to you? How did you feel when you found that out?
It was really bizarre, because I never really imagined myself on a list like that. And also at the same time, like, it doesn't mean that much in reality, but there is like that little kudos of being, you know, someone who grew up on free school meals to now be on the Forbes under 30. Like, that means something to my parents. That means something to me probably like 20 years ago as well. Like, so as a child, hearing that someone from the same background as me could achieve the things that I have achieved, you know, I haven't even achieved that much, and still that was beyond my perspective at a young age. I think it's really important to, like, be visible in that respect.
On visibility, a lot of people look up to you and might think that you're a role model. What sort of role model would you like to be?
Oh God, I don't think anyone really wants to be a role model, because then it feels like a very hard space to reside within, because you shouldn't really be looking to anyone else to know how to be in yourself. Like, you write how comfortably you can ride your path, you know? In a sense, like, I have a younger sister. I definitely think of her and I want to be a role model to her because I can still have conversations with her. It's very personal. It's hard to be a role model and be so removed sometimes because there's no reality in that relationship.
For sure. I think that's it for me so far. I want to open it up to the floor for questions now. You in the front.
Hello, thank you very much. And firstly, can I just say thank you for turning up, because I'm such a huge fan and it's lovely to see you here. What I wanted to ask was, like, in your music, I mean, I discovered you through Georgia, and like some of your songs, you sound so sort of confident and kind of like braggadocious and so on and so forth. But then we hear from you here and it's kind of like a very different sort of person. And I wondered, like, how do you get like in the spirit of kind of like rapping or kind of into the music and like get into the persona that you kind of give across so convincingly in some of your music?
I think it's all about like time and place, really. Like, when you know that you have the space to do it, you do it. It's like, I'm a big believer of like fake it till you make it. Like, and if the role is there to be filled, you fill it. I like writing the music, you know, it all happened in stages. So when I first started making music, I didn't think I want to be on stage and I want to be a performer. I just started making music, and then once that was made, I was like, obviously I'm going to perform it because I don't think anyone else could do a better job. But yeah, I'm lucky. I think my confidence has been nurtured. You know, I come from a home where my parents always told me I could be whatever I wanted to be, and I think that's really important to hear, like affirmation, you know, from a young age, because I knew I had that support, and that's always stayed with me in those moments where I did falter, where I did think, you know, the first times I was on stage, should I be on stage, you know? But I'm like, in those moments, that's when the voices came back to me, like, well, I can do whatever I want to do. And if there's no fear of failure, because I'm more scared of not trying. I hope that answered your question.
You in the second row.
Thank you so much for this. I was wondering what you see as your like relationship with the hyperpop genre, because I feel like your music has put in a lot of those playlists, you've worked with a lot of those artists, but then I feel like your music is also quite different from a lot of that experimental pop. So yeah, I was just wondering what you think of that, and if you think that category fits your music.
I don't know, I've always been really dubious about new genres lately. I think it's only in hindsight where you really see, like, looking back on people's careers, how they fit into different genres or like trends and movements. But it's not something I've consciously like pushed towards. And in some of those playlists, I'm like, I really don't understand why that song is in there. But especially when it's the more like darker experimental stuff that's next to some of this really like sugary sweet pop music. But you know, I feel like the talk on music journalism and playlisting is a longer one because I just don't think it's as, you know, broad and as pushed as possible. I think it's quite lazy.
How do you think we can change that?
We need more people in music journalism who are genuinely interested about pushing things further and not just interested in getting a free ticket to a gig.
That actually ties in with a question we've just received on a forum, asking about what you feel like has been the most daring step that you've made in your music and why.
I think like putting the first song out, probably, because, you know, I remember being at school, and I never did music at school or anything, and a lot of that was probably to do with, you know, being shy of not knowing what I'm doing. And there's always people in music who are like, just feel like they live and breathe it, and they know everything technically, and, or that's how I viewed it anyway. I think that was my insecurities in it. And so I'd never really tried, I'd never really put myself out there, and I'd always kind of been interested. And I think it probably showed in that a lot of my friends were musicians or were in music in some way, so there was always an affinity there. And to put something out for the first time, having nothing in the background to like validate why you're doing it, that was probably my biggest thing to get over. Once I'd done that, I was like, everything else is easy.
And what got you into music? I know you mentioned your father and the mixtapes, but really, what made you think this is what I want to do?
It was when I started like making music with friends, and without the idea of it being a song. You know, we were just making music, and one of my friends had asked me to write something for one of his live shows, and I was known with my friendship group, like, I love writing, and I was always writing little things, but I was never writing songs, you know, I wasn't writing anything to perform. I used writing as a cathartic process to just, like, get tons of phrases out of my head that I liked the sound of, but once I did that and I realized how I was doing it had a place within music, it was something that I never imagined before, and I realized I loved it, you know, I loved there's something that makes you feel important by hearing your voice played back to you, which is like, it's such a childlike novelty that hasn't died for me yet. And especially at the time, I was going through like a very angsty, like early 20s period of my life. And I had so many, probably like what I would probably class as negative emotions that didn't have much place in my real like everyday life. And as soon as I put it to music, I realized, okay, well, now it's a bit further away from me. I understand why I went through that. It has a place, has a life of its own. And that was something that was too valuable for me to give up.
On your music as sort of a place of its own, do you feel like critics have tried to pigeonhole you into a specific genre? And what would you say to those critics?
I think it goes back to that idea of things being up for adoption. I don't mind what home you choose to place it in, but for me, the most important part was the making.
For sure. Sam, yes.
Okay, hello. Thank you so much for coming. So you've spoken a lot about the sort of insecurities that you have had and so on and so forth. And obviously now it's sort of easier, I think, to look back at it and go, I should have just been more confident. But do you have any advice for, well, any of us here today who might be sort of feeling those insecurities, and about how to just sort of confront them? And also, as sort of like maybe a follow-up to that, what advice would you give sort of yourself if you were given a time machine and can go back 10 years or so?
The first part of your question, I think the most valuable thing is just to take time. Like, I think a lot of the insecurities is a rush to deal with it head on immediately. And that's not necessarily the right thing to do. I think, going back to what I said about everything finding a home and a place, for me, I'm quite philosophical about my experiences having a reason and a purpose beyond my immediate like knowledge of it. I kind of don't have an ego to assume that I know exactly what I should be experiencing or when and how. You kind of have to take stock of what is happening to you and make room for that beyond your idea of what you should be going through. Insecurities, I think, are sometimes just a conversation you need to have and take time to care for yourself. Because a lot of insecurities I find are based upon looking at other people and how you perceive they're dealing with their lives. And we really have no idea of what people are doing or how they're dealing with things. So you don't have to be confident. You just have to be happy with who you are.
We've had another question come in through the forum asking, what advice would you give to young creatives just starting out?
I think for me the most valuable thing has been collaboration, and that's not just in like the making of things. I think it's the shared space and the almost, hive mindness of it all. Like, something so affirming has been meeting other people and realizing that you're inspired by the same thing, or your response to something is the same and you've come from two different angles. Like, I only really got to understand that by, not being so concerned by the outcome of something and more about the processes. So if you're a young creative right now, I think it's more about looking at who surrounds you and who is your community to fall back on, because being a young creative is hard. There's so many periods of self-doubt and you're so hard on yourself because you want to achieve things, you want to have purpose, and you need the good community to surround you in those moments, people who understand what you're going through.
And would you give that advice to your younger selves? What would you tell?
I'd probably tell my younger self to listen a bit more to other people and stop shouting other people down, because I was definitely someone who thought I knew everything. And I didn't.
In the back.
Hi, I really liked what you said earlier about how there are different fragments of yourself in each song that you write and how you kind of put yourself into your music. I was just wondering if it kind of worked the other way when you kind of hear your music back. Does it then affect yourself in this kind of circular way, or is it more like you said before, it's like putting up for adoption and you just kind of leave it kind of situation?
No, definitely. I listen to all my demos on repeat while I'm making everything. And then once it's out, I stop listening, and there's a period of time when I'm just looking to the next thing or whatever. And then you go back to it after a while, and you're like, oh, do you know what? It's so interesting to hear what I was going through or what I was thinking or feeling, and how I don't feel like that anymore, or how I've evolved since that point. It's almost like I've never been able to keep a diary or a journal, but that's what this is for me. And it's not just wrapped up in my own experiences, but in the moments that happened around it. The things, the videos, the shows, the press, whatever. That's one thing. And then you also have the snapshot of the friends you were with at the time, the summers that the music got played in. It's way more colourful of an experience for me than what I tried to do when I was keeping a diary. It didn't quite have the same emotion that I think the songs have. If that answers.
Hi, thank you so much for coming today. I just wanted to pick up on the point about music journalism, and you talked about how you wanted things to be pushed further and how music journalists aren't necessarily contributing to that. What does pushing further look like, and how do music journalists, how can they further enable that as well?
I think, first of all, there's not loads of money in music journalism. So there's loads of really creative writers that may want to work in music journalism but don't, because they financially cannot. And I think that's something that has to be addressed, to really then look at the people that are involved in it. Because when you have that kind of environment, then it's possibly mostly people from a more privileged background who can get involved. That's not that wide of a perspective to be writing about other creatives who are from a way more diverse background. And I think when you're writing about other people's creative work, not just music journalism, but anywhere in the arts, I think you have to have an idea about where they're coming from to really like connect or evaluate how well they've come across in that aspect. So they're really the core things I think that need to be addressed before even looking at the type of people who get jobs at the magazines, you know, like, and how well they're doing those jobs. But it's definitely, with the loss of print media, you know, how that's dying out, it's a very limited field now. I don't think I have all the answers how to change it, but I definitely yearn for change. I hope that helps.
Do you find it easy to write and release music quickly, or do you take a lot of time before you release it?
I don't know, I've never really, even with the earlier stuff, I was never really in a rush. I think I was very appreciative of the time, not to like rehash the music so much, but to create the visuals. I think I'm probably more precious about the visuals than the music in a sense, because the music, I really like the spontaneity of what it offers. And when you record something, for me anyway, there's like an energy and a moment that you're trying to amplify. And I don't really go back so much and re-record vocals. I just kind of like that sometimes something's a little bit rough, or I didn't quite hit the note there, but it felt more real and it's more intimate and personal. But then when I'm looking at the visuals, I know how easy it is to misinterpret yourself visually. You know, the music, I've already left it up for interpretation, but the visuals, I'm like, okay, here is where I want to take the time to show you where I was coming from with it. And then you can access the music and see where you are coming from. But here, this is my bit. So that's why I think I don't mind, you know, something taking 6 months to come out rather than rushing something out and then looking back at it being like, why did I do that? Why didn't I take the time to like care for this and like give it to people the way it should be given? Because if it's worth something, it's worth the time you take.
With the visuals, I wanted to ask about the album cover. It's very, there's a lot of plastic there. What were you looking for people to get out of it when you said the visuals is something that you can sort of show your...
I don't know, that was a weird one, because like a lot of the music from that EP had been made prior to lockdown, and then there was like one or two tracks that came through lockdown. But you know, the visuals, I was in lockdown. I had spent time away from shoots, away from people, you know, sat in introspection for however long lockdown was. And then I was like, I was not in a rush to go in front of the camera and just like pose. You know, I just wasn't into it. I want to be excited by what I'm making, and I wanted to look at myself from a different perspective. I wanted to see myself flattened out. I wanted to see what was familiar in an unfamiliar way. And I took that literally when I went out and we made like a plaster cast on my face. And also I'd spent all those months like watching loads of sci-fi and TV. Like I think everyone rinsed their Netflix in that time. So that also really informed what I was making. I wanted it to feel fun, and for me there's a fun in the macabre. You know, there's something a bit like disgusting about it. But I'm like, why is that a bit disgusting? Just to see your skin and your face flattened out. We look at skin and faces every day. Like, why is it all of a sudden a bit disgusting to see it like that? And why am I still so intrigued? And I'm still thinking that. But I wanted to like keep making that, and I'll probably reinterpret it in loads of different ways until I really find an answer.
Well, with that intrigue, do you feel like lockdown and the pandemic has affected sort of the visuals that you feel like you're going for more than it has the music, or would you say it's difficult to separate the two?
I think it's affected everything. Like my tolerance for spaces that I don't feel comfortable in has gone really low, because now I've had the time to be completely comfortable. I want to take that feeling and put it into every space that I'm in now, like my visual work, tour, making the music. You know, I'm no longer happy with just pushing through and ignoring when I feel uncomfortable. I want to address it and make those spaces more comfortable for myself.
For sure. You in the pink?
Thank you. I was curious about which releases you're excited for upcoming, and any possible collaborations you're interested in the future.
Yeah, because I haven't really worked with a lot of other vocalists on my own music. I've worked in the studio for other people's things, but I've always kind of been a bit selfish with my music because I felt like I was still discovering my potential limitations or what I was capable of. It's hard to invite other people into that space when you're not even aware of how much space there is. And also I already felt like I was collaborating so much with the producers, and that can be a lot of energy in the room when you're trying to push your own narrative. But I have recently been working with some new people, some new vocalists. Like I worked with Slow Tie recently, Twigs. Not too many though. And I do feel like you should be precious about what you're making so that you don't just end up making any old pop song, there's so many of them there. I'd rather and there's so many features where people just tack on a feature because they think they're going to get the streams. But that's already happening, so why do I need to make more music like that? I don't want to put myself in an area of competition that I'm not interested in winning. I'm not interested in just having a cute name on the song. I want it to mean something and be doing something different. A lot of times people do suggest collaborations and it's someone who I think I'm probably adjacent to, or we're doing similar things. So I'm like, so what's that going to do on the track? We're going to fight for the same verse? No, I think you should be looking to collaborate with people who do something slightly different so that you're surprised by the outcome. And again, that does take time for me because I like it to come from a personal place. I like to build relationships. And, other artists are also very busy, schedules are hard. I don't want to work over Zoom with people I've never met. I want to be in the room because sometimes they provoke something out of you that you wouldn't have had by yourself. It's really interesting to see how other vocalists approach music as well, because everyone comes at it slightly different. Everyone has a different way of getting to the source of their talent, Sometimes I go into a room and I'm like, am I going to be able to write anything today? I don't know where it comes from. It's provoked. I find the beat and music provocative, and it inspires me to write. And I need the people that I'm working with to do that also.
Do you have a dream person that you want to collaborate with?
I'd be really, really intrigued to work with Mariah Carey, just to see what she's like in the room. But then there's people you just never know. You could be in there with your idol and they could be the meanest person ever, and you really don't want to ruin that dream.
You in the red?
This isn't intentionally following on from Mariah Carey, but what are your guilty pleasures? What's your cheesy music that you maybe don't
Mariah's not cheesy.
She's not,
God, I found that it's so hard to answer because I feel like you inadvertently insult someone because you don't want them to be a cheesy thing. But I think a lot of my friends would probably find some of my musical taste cheesy, but I think music should just be free. You should be able to lose yourself in it. I definitely listen to anyone you think of in the charts right now who you slightly cringe. I probably play them on repeat, so I'm not going to name names because I might end up meeting them. but music should be free. I think there's, I definitely came from that underground scene where people are a little bit pretentious about musical taste, and especially when you look at techno and the DJ scene in general is very pretentious, But isn't music meant to be fun? Isn't it meant to be expressive? When we were at the school disco, we were listening to some terrible music, but we were having fun, I think it should stay like that. I definitely have fun with the music I'm making.
All All right, I think that's all we have time for today as well. I think that's our hour up. But thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, guys. Honestly, you've been a pleasure. Thank you.
And be sure to catch us on YouTube. Just a quick rundown of events for the rest of the week. On Friday, which is tomorrow, we'll be welcoming Edwina Dunn virtually and Chidera Egeru, also known as the Slumflower, in person at 7. On Saturday, we'll be welcoming campaigner and activist Ellen Jones. On Sunday, we'll be having our panel on multiculturalism and race relations virtually. On Monday, we'll be welcoming Lord Dyson, former Master of the Rolls. Thank you so much, and have a great weekend.